Erev Tov, everyone. Yesterday, I discussed with you the subject of onoas mamon, of taking advantage of someone else monetarily. And I discussed with you the limits that the Gemara placed upon it, and that if it is more than a sixth of its true value, whether up or down, so then the sale can be canceled, can be retracted, because it falls under the getter, under the definition of onoas mamon. The Gemara tells us there's a second type of onoah, which perhaps is even more common, and one that we rarely think of. And that's called onoas dvorim. We abuse people with words. It's not money. And no money comes from it. But nevertheless, we know that many times in life, the words that are said to us in anger, in criticism, in haste, especially by people whom we are close to, are much more painful than any monetary loss. They don't go out of our memory very easily. So the Torah, when it said, Lo sonu ish es achiv, that you shall not be guilty of onoah, one Jew to another. So the Talmud tells us that's not necessarily a monetary matter, because monetary matters we already have, Geneva, Zela, Losashok, Schir Sochir, underpaying workers, holding back money. There are all sorts of lavin in the Torah that deal with money. And that's why honest money is not easy to come by. Chazal say that's why Mamonim Shov Tzadikim, it was the money of a really righteous person had greater value to him than just money, because it was kosher money. Kosher money is oftentimes a rarer commodity than kosher meat. Breuer in Washington Heights would always say, "Glat kosher, glat yosher," and but there's such a thing as onoas dvorim, that a person abuses someone else with words. Now, it comes in different fashions. One is simply insult. You insult a person. You belittle a person. You diminish the person's accomplishments and so forth. So Chazal compared that to busha, to shame. And the Gemara says that if you shame a person, it's a tinge of murder exists there because the person's face turns colors. The blood rushes in and then rushes out. So therefore, Malbin Pnei Chavero Barabim, if he insults someone personally, publicly, so that falls under the category of ritzicha, murder. Now, in our world, unfortunately, that's a very alien statement, especially in the political realm of people. And so it became a society where you can say anything you want. And the fact that there exists social media today, which speaks in the name of freedom of speech, so you can say anything you want about anybody. The Gemara is not of that opinion. The Gemara calls that onor. That's not lashon hara, because onor is direct. It's not lashon hara. Lashon hara is I tell Yanko that Shmerel did this, so that's lashon hara. But if I tell Yanko you're a cheater, that's not lashon hara, and it may even be the truth. But unless I have a very constructive reason for so doing, which the poskim address what the circumstances are, that's onor. I've insulted him. I've caused him pain, shame. So this halacha has a special effect regarding education, teachers. What can a teacher say, let's say, to a fourth grade student? So if he says you're an idiot, you're lazy, is that onor? Or perhaps it's the only way that he can get the child to respond and become better. And that's discussed in the tshuvas. So it's interesting. There are many tshuvas about whether you can remove a shochet. There are complaints about the shochet. So one thing that his hands shake, his chalif is not sharp enough. He doesn't really know the halachas well enough. So almost universally, the tshuvas are on the side of the shochet and not on the side of the accusers. There are two things in life, kosher and treif. There are a lot of things that may not be kosher, but they're not treif. Mr. Salanter used to say that in his hometown, they wanted to remove a shochet because they said his knife had a pegima in it, had a nick in it. It wasn't a good knife. And Rabbi Salanter said, how many pegimas did the knife of that removed the shochet have in it? But when it came to teachers, when it came to education, then they were on the side of the student. Because sometimes something that a teacher says can destroy a child's life forever, can make the child leave the fold. School is a very dangerous place. I'm not talking about the physical dangers that exist or the social dangers. The process of schools itself is a very dangerous thing. The Torah did not recognize it in the whole Chamisha Chumshei Torah. There are no schools. There's the father teaching the son, the mother teaching the children, but there are no schools. So schools is a later invention, a later creation. And schools are dangerous because oftentimes well-meaning people inflict a great deal of damage. Certainly when they're not well-meaning people. When they abuse others verbally. So this is a very delicate topic that is not often discussed, but it's something that should be thought about because of the fact that it has great potential both for good and not for good. Another form of verbal abuse that Chazal speak about is nivul peh. Saying obscenities. The Gemara says that the Hebrew is called Lashon HaKodesh because there are no obscenities in Hebrew. In modern day Hebrew, if you want to have an obscenity, it's borrowed from English or from other languages. But in the core of Lashon HaKodesh, there are no obscenities. The Gemara says, the Torah says, in Parsha Shmini, we learned it in Parsha Breshis, Behema HaTahora, the Torah is very careful in its words. It does not have extra words. So why didn't it say straight? Because the Torah didn't want to talk that way. And rather than saying Tmeya, the Torah added words, so that we don't have to say it. Tmeya, we don't have to say it that way. So the Torah is very careful on what it says. It's also very careful on human tragedies and situations. Everyone suffers tragedy. You cannot go through this world unscathed. That's Adam L'Omo Yula. So for instance, there's a, we learned we derived the laws of inheritance from the story of the daughters of Slova. In the end of Chumash Bamidbar will have the 5 wise, beautiful daughters. So they established the halacha of Nachalus. So in the halacha of Nachalus, if you look in the Torah, so it says a son inherits a father. If there are no sons, the daughters inherit. There's a different shiloh about daughters inheriting today, but that's not this lecture. And if there are no children, then collateral relatives inherit, uncles, cousins. The Gemara says, Ein l'cha b'Yisrael, there's no Jew that doesn't have some relative. And especially if there's an estate involved, there will be a relative. The Ramban asks a question here. In the chain of inheritance, the Torah omitted one case. Omitted the case if a son passes away and the son did not have any heirs, then his father inherits him. In other words, it goes up and down before it goes across. So the Ramban says, why didn't the Torah say that in all of Hilchos Nachlas? Why is that not mentioned? So the Ramban says the Torah didn't want to talk about such a situation. They knew that the Torah Shabbat Peh would take care of it. The Torah doesn't have to say it. The Torah is careful what it says. And therefore it's careful what it doesn't say. And that's the concept of Onoas Dvorim. The Chofetz Chaim talks about Onoas Dvorim even with facial expressions. It's told in our family that one of the great Rosh Yeshiva, my Zayda was a Talmud of his. So he had a wife that was an absolute terrible cook. To the extent that food was inedible almost. So I heard this from I heard it from my side of the family. I heard it from Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov told me also. So he said that when he was first engaged and he came Pesach to spend Pesach with the new in-laws, and she served knedlach, he said they were cannonballs. You couldn't eat it. So he didn't eat it. So she said to him, you didn't like it? So he said, no, I love it, but I don't eat gebrochts. And the rest of his life, he never ate gebrochts. Even though he was a Litvak and his children eat gebrochts. And tell her that what the food's no good. That's Onoas Dvorim. So my last comment is, can you tell the rabbi that his sermons stink? Think about it. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer, what's HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakos Yisrael? Aficha fir b'lahem Torah mitzvot.